Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with our next session. Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Jonas. I'm the Director of Communications with the National Association for Business Economics. We're excited about today's session, where we'll be talking about the fundamental-based valuation of cryptocurrencies. We're excited to have Michael Schwarz with us. Michael is Corporate Vice President and Chief Economist at Microsoft. He leads the economics team at Microsoft, which includes both economists and data scientists. His office primarily engages in three areas: demand forecasting, product pricing, and discounting and market design. Michael drives these topics and themes that need cross-company economics representation. So Michael is going to present for about 30 minutes. Please enter any questions you have into the Zoom chat, and we'll get to them during Q&A. Michael, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Chris. Well, I'll talk about the topic where truly tech and economics meet and collide, the valuation of cryptocurrencies. It's not every day that we see $1 trillion worth of value emerging out of thin air. So as an economist, I certainly would love to understand what's going there, and this is a try. So I'll talk about long-run market capitalization of cryptocurrencies. How do we think about cryptocurrencies based on fundamentals? And let me start out with just a quick review of fundamentals behind cryptocurrencies. So, well, digits and ledgers do not have intrinsic value. So certainly fundamental valuation of cryptocurrency is not based on some sort of intrinsic value. Let's imagine that there's one individual who somehow managed to purchase all the Bitcoins in the world. Well, how wealthy would that individual be? The guy who owns all Bitcoins. Well, if someone were to say purchase all the shares of General Electric, that person would be an owner of General Electric. He will be very wealthy and he will be collecting enormous dividends. Well, a person who owns all the Bitcoins in the world, if there were such a person, of course, there are many people who own Bitcoins, but if one person were to buy all of them, he would be a poor man because Bitcoin would be worthless. Cryptocurrencies offer anonymity and immutability of transactions, and those are both the main advantage, but also the main drawback of cryptocurrency. So first of all, if there's a fraudulent transaction involving your credit card, involving your bank account, you have a lot of recourse, and chances are you will be able to recover your money. A fraudulent transaction can and normally will be reversed if it happened with money in your bank account. Well, not so with transactions in cryptocurrency. If someone stole your account number and your password, you're pretty much out of luck because transactions are, well, have a property of immutability. So cryptocurrency networks have quite limited capacity, orders of magnitude smaller than other financial networks with much smaller market caps. And payments are slow to clear, sometimes very, very slow to clear because there is basically a bottleneck in the network. And, well, there's no dispute channel. Right now, there's enormously high energy price, $75 in energy cost, roughly, for every Bitcoin transaction. So if you move away from proof of work to proof of stake, which Ethereum did, the energy costs come down dramatically, but there are some other technical issues there as well. So what are the fundamentals behind cryptocurrency? Well, maybe cryptocurrency is valuable simply because, well, for the same reason why other currencies are valuable. It's a method of payments. Maybe it's a very convenient way to transact. Well, we already saw on the previous slide that it's not a particularly convenient way to transact. But maybe for some other reasons, it's just happened to be enormously good way to transact. Well, that's not the case. In fact, if you would look at transaction volume in cryptocurrencies, and for that we have very, very good data because the ledger for Bitcoin, for example, is public. So you can actually see how much people transact. And what you see is that the bulk of Bitcoin holdings are not moving anywhere. They're just sitting in the wallets, not moving at all. And the total volume of transaction, so November last year, just $300 million of merchant sales, that's all. So that kind of volume for, the asset that has total market cap around $1 trillion is really small and couldn't possibly justify the valuation of cryptocurrencies. So, well, is there anything that would justify, based on fundamentals, the kind of valuation that we see? And I would argue, that the answer to this question is actually yes. Cryptocurrency does have very large value as a store of value, as opposed to a tool for transacting. And I believe that use case, just a single use case of cryptocurrency as a store of value, is more than sufficient to justify the current market cap of all cryptocurrencies combined. And I will talk about it more at later slides. I would like to stress that there are other use cases as well. Of course, I will just focus on one single use case. And even that one use case potentially, based on fundamentals, justifies, more than justifies, the current market cap of cryptocurrencies. So let me start with a little history lesson, banking history lesson. So in some ways, cryptocurrency is 21st century incarnation of numbered Swiss bank accounts. But of course, it's a lot more than that too. So one of the remarkable properties of cryptocurrencies is that there's a great deal of anonymity there. One can create a Bitcoin wallet or Ethereum wallet without disclosing his identity. And generally speaking, that is not something that you can do with a bank. You have to prove your identity, you have to prove fund origins, and so on and so forth. Of course, cryptocurrencies also have a property that they could not be just confiscated from someone with a court order, because it's a decentralized ledger. So, but those things actually have a precedent in banking history. And until late 20th century, Swiss law made it virtually impossible to confiscate assets of foreign depositors, even they are convicted of tax evasion or corruption. So the same is obviously true for cryptocurrency, right? If someone has a Bitcoin wallet, even if that person is convicted of corruption, unless that person volunteers to disclose his the password from Bitcoin wallet, there's very little that could be done to confiscate his funds. So it's quite similar to how numbered Swiss bank accounts were in 20th century. It's not at all how banks in any country operate in the 21st century. So today there are international treaties, and with proper court orders, funds could be confiscated. So here's just one example of how incredibly protected Swiss bank accounts were for most of the 20th century. Hitler was a major tax evader, among other things. He stored billions of dollars in today dollars in Swiss bank accounts, many billions. And well, obviously, those were all stolen money, and obviously he never paid any taxes on those. And even after the war, even after Germany was defeated, Swiss banks never returned Hitler's money until almost half a century later. So for most of the 20th century, it was actually possible to open a Swiss bank account and accounts in a number of other countries without verifying identity. Today, it's no longer the case, but it was a very long route. So the reason that Switzerland eventually agreed to get rid of numbered accounts that were quite profitable, that was a huge business for Swiss banks, was because of enormous pressure from US and EU, because US and EU saw those accounts as vehicles for money laundering and tax evasion, and they were putting enormous pressure on countries that had those types of accounts, essentially by threatening to cut out those countries from the world financial system. US and Europeans got their way, but took a long time. So I don't want to sound like a cryptocurrency skeptic. In some ways I am, and in some ways I'm not. I'm very excited about cryptocurrencies. So let me share with you a quote that very much reflects my sentiment about cryptocurrencies. It's a quote from Ralph Merkle, who is an inventor of public key cryptography. The technical community was fascinated with this new life form, Bitcoin, not because of what it could do or had done, but because it was a new life form. Suppose you lived on a sterile planet, and all day long you swam in its sterile oceans and watched the waves on its sterile shores. And one day you saw a single trilobite, and you took it apart, and you realize you can build it. And not only you can build trilobites, you can build any of the strange creatures in the Cambrian explosion. And you dimly understood that there were things beyond the Cambrian explosion, and you might be able to build them too. So I really love this quote because it's almost poetic. It's almost like a poem, but also I think it's really, really true. We are at the very, very beginning of the evolution of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. And frankly, we have absolutely no clue where it will all end up in 10, 20, 30 years. It's evolving at extraordinary speed, and there's no way of predicting where it will take us. And the journey may be quite a difficult and dangerous one. So now let's go back to the value of Bitcoins based on fundamentals. So as I mentioned before, some of the demand for Bitcoin, that's not the only source of demand, but some of that demand is similar to the source of demand of people who were using Swiss numbered accounts in the 20th century. People who wanted to hide wealth and people who wanted to make sure that the wealth could not be expropriated under any circumstances. So how large is that stock of wealth? Because it's reasonable to expect that a decent chunk of that stock of wealth would be stored in cryptocurrencies, because those obviously are pretty much the only vehicles right now where one can store wealth without disclosing identity and without the possibility of it being fairly easily confiscated with appropriate court orders. So business and individuals pay more than 1 trillion in bribes every year, but that's the annual flow of bribes. And the stock is obviously enormously greater, right? So some of those bribes end up being spent, but a lot of them, especially by the big time corrupt officials, are saved and stored for years and years. So the stock there should be really enormous. So let me give you one little example that I really like because it illustrates so much about the problem there. So it's a case of Russian anti-corruption official, Dmitry Zakharenko. In 2016, Zakharenko, whose job was to catch people who engage in bribery, he himself was caught with over $100 million in cash and precious metals. And all of that was physically stored on his property. He had multiple apartments that were literally filled with cash currency and precious metals. And that's how he got caught. And that was the evidence in his trial that led to conviction. So, 2016, cryptocurrencies weren't all that popular. And in 2016, the kind of wealth that Zakharenko managed to accumulate through his corrupt activities was actually just too big to even consider storing it in cryptocurrencies. Of course, that's no longer the case today. It's quite possible to store this kind of wealth in cryptocurrencies, and the market cap is so large now. Imagine if Zakharenko would have been aware of a possibility of taking bribes in cryptocurrencies instead of cash and precious metals. Well, if he were, and if technology were available at that time, he probably would not be in jail right now. Because if a bribe is given in cryptocurrency, well, that could be just 2 numbers on a napkin, and someone may be passing him that napkin through some trusted associate, and then there's assuming that a person who is taking that bribe is technologically literate and knows how to conceal his identity when he or she uses the internet, well, in that case, there's virtually no way to tie that property to the corrupt official. There's almost no trace. And also there's no possibility to expropriate that wealth. Well, obviously, Zakharenko is far from being the most corrupt official in the world. In fact, there are plenty of officials, including heads of state, who are rumored to have much greater wealth. For example, Putin's net worth is estimated to be as high as $200 billion. There was a regional Chinese official, not even nowhere close to being a head of state, who was caught with collecting 40 billion in bribes. 40 billion. Hosseini Mubarak family may have stolen about 70 billion from public funds. And the list goes on and on, right? Those are just some examples that we know about from Panama Papers, from prosecutions, from newspapers. So there's this enormous stock of illicit wealth. And one would think that it would be rational and prudent for those extraordinarily wealthy and extraordinarily corrupt individuals to store significant share of their wealth in cryptocurrencies. And obviously, adoption is a slow process, right? So many of the corrupt officials are not the smartest people in the world or technologically savvy. So spread of kind of cryptocurrency technology among kind of the market share of cryptocurrency technology in the world of corrupt officials is not instant. I don't know what that share is today, but I'm sure there's nowhere near 100% adoption there. Well, that means that as more and more corrupt officials start using cryptocurrency to accept bribes, since supply is limited, we should expect that would start putting more and more upward pressure on the market cap of cryptocurrencies. So, by the way, I don't want to make it sound like this is the only use of cryptocurrencies. Of course, cryptocurrencies could be used for many other things that are perfectly legal. And some of those things are not just legal, but very socially useful. For example, when you think about corrupt officials needing to hide their wealth, well, think about honest citizens who are being extorted by corrupt officials. Well, they may want to use cryptocurrency too to hide their wealth from people who extort them. There are other important use cases. In oppressive dictatorships, opposition is basically often not able to raise any funds because their bank account would be immediately arrested. So countries where opposition is essentially criminalized, and unfortunately there are a lot of countries like that in the world, there it's common for opposition leaders to fundraise in cryptocurrencies, and that's how they sustain the movement. So let me share with you one more observation. So when you think about demand for cryptocurrencies, well, for the use case of corruption and the like, the demand is actually almost perfectly inelastic, because the agent who is giving a multi-million-dollar bribe, say in Bitcoin, from his point of view, it doesn't matter what the value of the Bitcoin is. He just knows he had to deliver $1 million in Bitcoin. Doesn't matter if it buys 1 Bitcoin or 100 Bitcoins or 1,000 Bitcoins. And it's somewhat similar for bribes recipient as well, because as long as bribe recipient has a reasonable faith in cryptocurrency, whatever the market price of Ethereum or Bitcoin is the market price. And there's a reasonable expectation, by the way, that it will continue to grow over time unless there are some drastic regulations. Why am I expecting that it will continue to grow in the absence of regulations? Well, as I mentioned before, the adoption of cryptocurrency by people for whom it's a relevant asset is very far from 100%, because simply technology spreads slowly, right? There are many products that are sort of useful for some people, but those people very slowly adopt them. We know that from many studies, starting from unicorn studies by Grillikis, that shows that even when farmers have grain that's massively superior, have access to grain that's massively superior to what they use, they take many years to actually adopt that new technology that's superior. So the same is true for every technology, including cryptocurrencies. And that means that since adoption is very far from 100%, but since the stock of major cryptocurrencies is fixed, unless, so if major cryptocurrencies remain kind of the dominant currencies, which is quite likely due to network effect, not certain for sure, but likely, then we could expect that the market cap of cryptocurrencies will keep growing until everybody for whom it makes sense to adopt that technology will adopt it. And at that point, when there is full adoption, we should still expect that the market cap of cryptocurrencies will continue to grow. Why it would continue to grow? Well, because presumably it will grow just slowly. It will grow roughly at the rate of the growth of the world GDP, because one should expect that the demand for cryptocurrency, the market cap of cryptocurrency, ought to be in equilibrium proportional to the size of privacy-seeking wealth. And it's reasonable to expect that just due to world's GDP growth and population growth, the size of GDP of privacy-seeking wealth would be growing over time roughly at the rate of the growth of world's GDP, right? So in the long run, that's what we should expect from the growth of cryptocurrencies. But before we reach that point, I think we should expect them to grow more rapidly. Cryptocurrencies are quite difficult to police and regulate for obvious reasons. I would like to highlight kind of the last bullet point here. So some officials who might have influence over regulating cryptocurrencies may themselves have vested interest in cryptocurrencies. And that could create additional headwinds for potential regulations. And we know that senior government officials around the world are routinely discovered with multi-billion-dollar holdings of ill-gotten wealth. So we know that in 2016, from Panama Papers leak, we know that there were 140 public officials who were caught there, including 12 heads of state. And just in the last 3 years, we have 8 heads of state who are imprisoned on corruption charges. So think about it. All those people are potential cryptocurrency users and also potential defenders, since they have vested interest there. And we also have kind of the precedent of numbered Swiss bank accounts. Erosion of Swiss banking security in the last 20th century took many decades of international pressure, and cryptocurrency are arguably even more challenging to regulate because A, there's already $1 trillion market cap there, and B, the system is completely decentralized. So now let me spend a few minutes on NFTs. I have a lot to say on NFTs, but I have 3 minutes left, so sorry. So let me just say a few words there. So one of the interesting properties of NFT that could actually be further boosting demand for cryptocurrencies is that NFTs may be used for money laundering. So obviously NFTs are used by many people. There are many collectors who like NFTs and collect them. There are a lot of people who are speculating in NFTs, hoping that they will increase in value. And sometimes we see NFTs increasing the value overnight by a factor of 10 or 100 or even 1,000. Obviously, most NFTs don't do it, but it's like a lottery ticket. So let's continue. with the example of bribe money. So let's imagine that government official who took an enormous bribe, many $1 million in cryptocurrency. And let's imagine that government official, let's say judge, right? So obviously he could not consume whatever wealth he accumulated through bribery while on the bench. And fortunately, in the United States, there are few corrupt judges, and I hope it will always stay this way. I think there are many countries in the world where, unfortunately, the situation is very, very different. So you can easily imagine a judge who took millions of dollars of bribes and who stores that wealth in cryptocurrencies for years and years. And then when he resigns from the bench, several years after that, out of the spotlight, he may want to, in some way, legalize his wealth. How could he do it? Well, there are many ways to do money laundering, but NFT offers a particularly elegant way to do it. So here it is. You can imagine that corrupt official perfectly legally spending several $1,000s of his own money to legally purchase several very unusual NFTs. And there are plenty of very unusual NFTs. So most of them are worthless and will always be worthless. So let's imagine that judge who created a small collection using just several $1,000s of very unusual NFTs. Well, he can sit on those two for several years or not. And then using his, anonymous cryptocurrency account that's not linked to his name in any way, he can purchase one of his NFTs essentially from himself for millions of dollars. Well, at that point, what you have is a lucky person who collected NFTs, and one of those NFTs appreciated immensely, and an anonymous buyer purchased it. So in this respect, NFT offers a really, so by the way, most money laundering schemes rely on some sort of asset where value is very difficult to assess. But for most assets, it's very rare to find an asset where the value could fluctuate, say, 1,000 times, right? Like, for example, in real estate, value could easily fluctuate 2 times or 4 times, but not 1,000 times. So with NFTs, 1,000-time fluctuation is not that implausible. And that's what makes it such an attractive potential instrument for money laundering. Well, there's a lot more to say about cryptocurrencies, but there's no more time. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Michael. That was an informative talk. I encourage everyone to enter questions into the chat as we move to Q&A here. Maybe I will start, if we just stay on regulation to begin with. How do you view the U.S. government, how do you view the U.S. government stance on this? I mean, what can they do? What options do they have in terms of, going after, it seems like their only option may be to go after centralized companies that are headquartered within their borders and go after those products and services. But other than that, there's no real way to get at something that's decentralized and without turning off the entire internet. So how do you think that they are thinking about this?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's a really, really difficult problem. And I'm certainly not an expert on international law and international banking regulations. I think there's a little bit more tools in the disposal of the governments who want to crack down on illegal activity associated with cryptocurrencies without killing legal activities that are perfectly legitimate. So again, let's just turn to the 20th century. So how did the how did the international community convince Switzerland to give up banking privacy laws? And those privacy laws applied not just to numbered accounts, they apply to all Swiss bank accounts. So how was Switzerland convinced? Well, it was a very complicated negotiation, but there was one very powerful threat that United States had there. And the threat was, well, we want you to agree to a certain set of rules and regulations. And if you don't, we'll cut your entire country and your entire banking system out of the world's financial system, because we would simply view everything that comes out of you as being rotten. So, well, that's a pretty powerful threat.
Pretty big stick.
It's a pretty big stick. It's not an entirely credible stick, but there are also intermediate versions of the stick where you say, well, no, we're not going to entirely cut you out, but anybody who touches you had to comply with this enormous number of things to make sure that none of your stuff touched the dirty stuff, right? So, but it's a big stick. So obviously, with cryptocurrencies, you can actually have similar sticks being used, right? You can say, well, within our national boundaries, we have those and those disclosure requirements, and then we want, and then of course there are ports of entry, right? How do you move those things from either person to person or from cryptocurrency to national currencies. So basically you can again have a similar structure where say, well, we want all the countries who want to participate in the world financial system also adopt this set of regulations. And if they don't, then we could partially or completely exclude them from the world's financial system. So not an easy thing to do. And again, if you have a country where the head of state and a bunch of senior officials have enormous wealth of in cryptocurrencies, and they're worried that they will be overthrown at some point and thrown to jail, and all the wealth will be confiscated, and nobody would feel pity on them. Well, they may be very attached to the idea that cryptocurrencies should have a self-refuge somewhere in the world, and there may be enough countries that would very much resist that.
Interesting. So you touched on NFTs there at the end of the talk. You know, NFTs they've really gone mainstream this year. I mean, we're seeing big brands, Disney and TikTok and, the NBA and some other sports leagues dive into NFTs. They're minting NFTs based on their IP. And we know Facebook and Twitter are very focused on the metaverse. So where do you see this going? I mean, are we moving into a new era of sort of digital property and even like digital real estate, or is this just a fad, or how do you view this?
Well, so I think that's a great question. I wish I knew the answer to this question, and I think that I don't know if NFT is a fad, if NFT is kind of a new important asset class, so to speak, or maybe it's both. Let me kind of go through things on both sides a little bit. So first, I think that anybody who ever dealt with property rights for digital content knows that it's just a mess. It's a big pain point. So the system of property rights for digital content is very suboptimal, shall we say. And that's not too surprising, right? Like, the system of property rights for houses that we have evolved over, we are definitely direct descendants of Romans there. It was evolving even before that, right? So it's thousands of years old, and we really, and we still have to have title insurance in spite of all of that, right? So even that system is not perfect, but it's pretty darn
ripe for
good.
disruption, you would say.
Huh?
Ripe for disruption.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think I think we have a pretty good system going there. We were optimizing it for 2,000 years, and it continues to evolve, and it would improve. But for digital assets, the system just started to evolve, like basically yesterday, right? And anybody who deals with any kind of property rights for digital content knows that, like, dealing with it is a pain, and things are complicated, much more so than they need to be. And the system is evolving, and NFT offers something there where basically you have a token that proves your ownership of certain digital rights, of certain digital content. So that could be valuable, and that could evolve into a very useful tool for managing digital property rights. It's not quite clear how it would happen and why you necessarily need blockchain for that, but things are evolving in that direction, and hard to predict, but it could create a lot of value. But then there are other things about NFTs that I see as potentially much less healthy. So first of all, so we certainly see lots of dramatic price increases of various NFTs, really mind-boggling, right? Increases of 100 times are not something that people go like, oh, that's impossible, it never happened. It happened with many NFTs. So there's certainly something happening there. And I would be shocked. I don't have any proof of that. I don't know if anybody deliberately inflates NFT values. I couldn't prove it, but I would be shocked if this is not going on. Why? Because there are certainly well-documented cases of, from years ago, of people doing inflating values of art in order to create price benchmarks and sell art. So we know that there were instances where people would have a collection of a certain artist that had very low value, and then they would basically sell it to themselves multiple times, creating an illusion that that artist price goes up and up and up, and establishing a new very high price. And then they would take one of the paintings and they would sell it to someone at 30% discount relative to that very, very high price that was established for that artist through a chain of fraudulent transactions. We know people who went to jail for doing stuff like that. Well, it's very easy to do this kind of thing with NFT, much easier than with art, because you don't have to move anything physically. So with art, if I sold you a piece of art and I didn't ship it to you, well, that proves illegal activity. With NFT, well, it ships automatically, right? Buyers could be anonymous in cryptocurrencies, nobody's surprised there. So it's much harder to detect it. It hasn't been detected yet to my knowledge, but I'm sure it's happening. It could not be happening. It doesn't mean that NFTs are rotten. It just means that, in the Wild West, wild things happen. And, just because once upon a time California was Wild West doesn't mean that California was rotten. It's wonderful. Well, same goes for Texas. So I think that's kind of the same thing with NFT. There are some of those very unsavory things, I'm sure, happening. I also think that once you see those assets where some things just increase in price by 10x, 100x, 1000x, it attracts kind of gambler instinct in people. So if you have a choice, you can gamble on NFTs, or you can gamble by lottery tickets. Well, NFT actually does a better job satisfying your gambling instinct. So first of all, you're probably getting much better betting odds if you buy NFTs than if you buy lottery tickets. Lottery tickets give you terrible odds. Second, so even if the thing is in a bubble, still as a gambler, you may prefer NFTs to lottery tickets. And second, NFTs are sort of, you buy NFT that's meaningful for you, so it could be fun. You have at least something. So I think that there are a lot of complicated things happening there. I don't know all the answers. I wish I did, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I know we're out of time. Thank you for everyone who entered questions in the chat. Maybe we can just squeeze in one more real quick. There's one on cryptocurrencies. Aren't they a good alternative for developing countries where the banking system is not rigorous?
Oh, that's a big, long question. So I think first, that sort of, I think several aspects to this. So first, I think we really need to distinguish between cryptocurrencies that are sort of like Bitcoin and Ethereum versus stablecoin that are basically backed by some national currency or some real assets. So those are quite different. And then there's a third kind of currencies that I wouldn't call cryptocurrencies, but digital currencies, right? Because you don't have to use blockchain to have a ledger. It's enough to just have some trusted party that just handles transactions. And a lot of what you see, for example, in Africa, are payment instruments quite popular that people use on the phone that are electronic currency effectively, but they're not a cryptocurrency in the sense that they don't rely on blockchain. That bit, they rely on sort of a trusted party, which just could be a private company that manages that network. So those are kind of the three very different animals in the room there, so to speak. And I think one can give like another 45-minute talk about each of the three. But since we are out of time, I think I'm saved by the bell.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. Thanks for joining us. Hope you can come back sometime and talk about cryptocurrencies. It's an exciting and emerging field, new asset class, and I think that it'll be exciting to watch in the coming years. Okay, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll move on to our next sessions.
Thank you. Bye-bye.